In this exercise, we will be using Excel functions to help us calculate the mean, which is what most people think of as the average, where you add values together and divide by how many numbers you have. Then we have the median, which is the middle value when your data values are laid out in order, or it could be the average of the two middle values if it's an even number of values in your data set. Then the mode, which is the number that repeats the most often in your data set. You can also have no mode if there's no data value that is repeated, or you can even have multimodal data, so more than one mode, if you have more than one number in your data set that is repeated the same frequency, the same number of times. And then your mid-range is the value that lies exactly in the middle between your minimum and maximum. So between the smallest value and the largest value in the data set, if you average those two together, in other words, add them together and then divide the sum by 2, you would get the mid-range. So I just wanted to give you a quick review of what all these values are, but for the purposes of this video, we will be focused on actually using Excel, although I want to stress that it is very important to have learned how to calculate each of these values without the aid of technology. So basically just using the mathematical formulas. It's very important to at least know how to do that a few times with small data sets so that you have a better sense and understanding of what each of these measures is representing. But then once we get past understanding what they are and how to interpret them, we do want a more efficient way of calculating these very common measures of center. And especially when your data sets start getting larger and larger into, hundreds and thousands, it's just not going to be feasible to always have to do it by hand. So learning how to use technology with a small data set is kind of a nice way to get you used to the idea of technology, but also allow you to do it by hand if you want to kind of verify that it's coming out the way it should, which is always a good practice. All right, so let's go ahead and copy the data and paste it into Excel. What we're going to make sure to do is to select from outside the borders of the table. Now, I know this table doesn't actually have any lines showing borders, but it is a table of data and there are boundaries that you can't see or borders that you can't see here. Um, if I were to select too close to the data and then copy and paste into Excel, um, well, this time it worked fine, but I've done it with this specific problem before when it didn't copy the way I wanted it to. All right, it's working fine. I wanted to demonstrate, I got another idea. So here's another thing that happens that can, so one thing is to make sure that you select your data from kind of outside the boundaries of the table, because sometimes if you don't, then this will happen. And I just demonstrated how to make that happen, even though um, maybe I selected it from outside the borders of the table. I this time double clicked in my cell. And if you just notice the difference, like when I just click on the cell and only click once and then paste, it looks like it's supposed to with each data value in its own cell. But if I double click, okay, so like that, double click, into a cell, then you see the cursor flashing, waiting to type, right? And so when you see that cursor flashing, you're actually inside of that cell, and anything that you paste is going to stay just within that cell, and so it comes out all messed up. Or I guess it's not all messed up, but it's not the way you want it. So if you do that, just use the undo button or do Control Z, which is also how you do undo with keyboard shortcuts, and just make sure that you are not double clicking before you paste your data. And, you know, if you're still getting something weird coming up, make sure again that you have selected from way outside the table. All right, so that's just getting the data into Excel. Once you've mastered this, it's going to make your life extremely convenient for many problems. So you want to get good at doing that first. All right, then once you have your data in the spreadsheet, you can start to calculate these measurements. Now, I'm just going to make a place for each of the answers, the mean, the median, the mode, and the mid-range. Okay. And then I'm going to click in the cell next to the mean, and I'm going to put an equal sign because I'm about to do a calculation. And whether I'm going to do 2 plus 3, or if I'm going to do something fancier like the mean, I need to start with an equal sign. An equal sign basically turns the cell into a little mini calculator. So you can do basic math functions in here. Like I showed you, 2 plus 3, you can do 2 times 3. But again, if I don't put that equal sign first, 2 times 3 should give me 6. But if I don't put the equal sign first, it just stays in there as text. So the equal sign is what turns it into a calculator. And then I can do things like 8 divided by 4. And I can do exponents using the caret key. But again, making sure to put an equal sign first. And especially when you do divisions, if you do, say, 8 divided by 4, without putting an equal sign first, you'll get a date. It'll auto format to a date. And then if you go, oh yeah, I forgot my equal sign, equals 8 divided by 4, well, now that it's been formatted as a date, it does not know how to go back. So I can just do undo again and then make sure to use my equal sign the next time I do it. Okay. If all else fails, you can right click on the cell and then go to Format, Cells, go to the data type, the number, and change it. So if it's on date, you can change it back to number format. You can even set the number of decimal places and all that. All right. Now the mode. No, sorry, I lost my place. I got kind of sidetracked because I know that my students are in the early part of their course and there's going to be some common mistakes that students make in the beginning. So I wanted to just kind of build those in here while we're doing some basic calculations for the first time with Excel, or one of the first times with Excel. I feel like I need to just start over, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to finish this. Okay, so I'm going to do equal sign. And if you start typing in mean, some stuff comes up, but it's different than what I am looking for. I'm just looking for the mean, right? Geo mean, har mean, blah, blah, blah. Whatever that is, that doesn't seem right. Actually, in Excel, it's called the average. So even though statisticians use the word mean, in Excel, it is the common vernacular average. And so I double clicked on average. You can also just type the whole word in by hand and then put a parenthesis. Okay. The open parenthesis sets for where you're going to be selecting the cells where your data is. So you can either do it down there in the cell, or you can click up on the formula editor bar after the parenthesis, and then all you need to do is just select your data all in one go, and then press enter. Okay, now there's my mean. If I wanted to test that this is right, I could add up all the numbers. Okay, I can either do it by just clicking on the cells and adding them like this. Okay, I selected them all. I'm going to press enter. There's my total sum. And then, of course, I want to divide that by how many I have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 data values. So I can divide by 10. Okay, now watch what happens. Some of you may know already what the mistake is that I'm making here, but I'm going to tell you in a moment. But first, look at the answer I get here. It's the wrong answer. Okay, remember, we're supposed to be calculating the average or the mean of all these data values. And here I have added all my values up and then divided by 10, and the answer I'm getting is 976.38. Now, if you look at these data values, there's no way that the average, the middle a measure of center for this data can't possibly be 976.38 because the values only range from like 83.7 up to, what's the greatest value, 127.1. So what did I do wrong? Well, I forgot to calculate the sum as its own quantity. So I'm just putting parentheses now around the part where I did all the adding. And then now that I've got that in parentheses, it'll total up my sum and then divide by 10. Before, when without the parentheses, it was only dividing my last value, my last, yeah, 114.8 was only getting divided by 10 and then added to the rest of the numbers. I wanted the whole entire sum of all of the data values to be divided by 10. So now when I press enter, I get an answer that is actually reasonable. And in fact, it is right in line with what I got from my Excel function. And so using the math formula, I got the same answer. So it's just helpful sometimes um, when you're in the learning process, especially to try it both ways if you have a nice small data set. Now the median, remember, is going to be the value in the middle. There is actually a median function, okay? And I just select my data and press enter. However, again, it's important to know how to find this without using a special Excel function. Now, um, remember, your median is the middle value when your values are laid out in order from least to greatest. I'm just going to copy this data down here, and I'm going to put it all in a nice little row. So let me pause while I'm doing this. All right, so I just put all the values in one column over to the side here. And now I'm going to use the data up here, sort option, so that they're all in order from least to greatest. And now I can easily tell where the middle is, okay? Because I have 1, 2, 3. Why is it like that? Picking it up as data. I don't know why it looks like that. But anyways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? 10 data values. Okay, so I have 10 data values. Well, the median is the divider. It's actually the 50th percentile. If you divide the data up into two equal halves, what value is going to divide them? And so since I have an even number of data values, I have 10, right? So half of 10 would be 5, right? So these 5 values are my lower 50% of the data, and these values over here are my upper 50% of the values. Now, in between the lower 50% and the upper 50%, we need a divider. Now, if it was an odd number of data values, we would just use whatever value was right in the middle. But since this is an even number of values, what we need to do is actually add up these two values and divide by 2. Now, you can either, add them up, and again, you're going to need parentheses to keep the sum when you add what is it, 106.4 and 107, and then divide by 2, okay? Notice the parentheses. That will get me my answer. Another way is to do the average of the two middle values, like that, okay? Now, sorry, that was supposed to be up here. I have it in the wrong spot. Here. Average of the two middle values, okay? So yeah, you can either do it with Excel using the median function on all of the data values or even these original values, okay? Or you can do average of the two middle values, or you can simply add them up and divide by 2. All right, now the mode, remember, is the number that repeats the most often. So I'm looking from one data value to the next to see if any are the same, identical. And we do have 3 values right here, or yeah, 3 data points, 3 data observations that are all the same value. So the mode is 127.1 because it repeats the most number of times, right? It has a frequency of 3. So this data value, 127.1, has a frequency of 3, which makes it the mode. And notice I'm using the data value as the mode. I'm not saying that 3 is the mode. We're not saying how many times is the most number of times that something shows up. No, we're looking for the value that shows up the most often, and that is the actual mode. Okay? And I don't know if there even is a mode single. Let's try this. Yeah, it worked too. There was a mode formula. So I actually did it backward there. mode.sngl. I've actually never tried to use that before, and that worked too. Okay, then midrange. Let's see, mid returns the characters from the middle of a text string given a starting point and length. That's going to be more complicated than it's worth. Um, and I've never even tried that either. But remember, mid-range, all it is the midpoint between your minimum and your maximum. Okay, well, your minimum, since we have our data values sorted out, we can see is 83.7, right? And there is actually also a minimum function that you can run on your whole data set if they're not in order and if the data set's a little too big and you don't want to try to figure out what's the smallest one by searching around, you can use the min function in Excel. And also there's a max function. So I can see that the max right here is my largest value is 127.1. I also have a maximum function that I can use on my original data set just by selecting it and pressing enter. So here's my min and my max. Now, what is the exact middle point? If you lay this out on a number line, where is the exact middle point? So it's different than saying what's the middle position or the middle divider. That's more about position, whereas min to max is more about distance because there's a certain distance between these two, and then halfway between is going to be the middle point, when you're halfway across from one point to the other. So we're not looking for half of the distance, which is also something that students will sometimes do. They'll say, oh yeah, I remember that the range is to subtract the maximum minus the minimum. That's my range. So of course my mid-range is probably just take that range and divide it by 2, and then you've got your mid-range. No, that is different. That's actually semi-range, I believe. Half of the distance. What we're looking for is the actual point. So it has to be a value that lies in between the minimum and the maximum. And all we have to really do is average those two values. And you can use a comma in between them if they're not side by side. So it's easy to select them together. You can actually select one cell at a time and just separate them by commas if you ever need to do that. I could also simply add, 83.7 plus 127.1, close the parentheses and divide by 2, right? So I was just checking that my Excel function and my math formulas are giving me the same answer. So please do that for yourself so that you have a sense of what these values are and you're not just always using Excel functions blindly, because it's easy to use an Excel function, get an answer, and think that everything's cool, but you can make mistakes using an Excel function too. So it's much more effective, especially in the beginning and especially when you have a small data set, to try both ways, get to where you have a sense of what reasonable answers look like so that you can catch yourself if you do make a mistake. All right, so that is the end of this video. But what I'm going to do real quick is just record a second video, which is going to be just me running through the calculations super fast. Am I going to do that? I mean, I guess I'm going to do it like right now. Yeah, so I'll do that right now. Okay, so this is for, I guess, the student that wants to be able to just see the solution without any explanation. So I will post that also. All right, so quick explanation. Copy the data. Okay, so select the data, right click and copy. And we're going to put that right into Excel. And now that I've got my data in there, I'm going to calculate my mean, my median, my mode, and my mid-range using Excel functions. So for the mean, I'm going to use the average function. So all I'm doing is putting in an equal sign. And just do that again, equals. Then I'm starting to type in average. Even after I've typed in a few letters, I see pop-ups of recommendations and a description that pops up that shows me what each of those are. I can also use the formulas auto sum feature. I can also search for functions by clicking on this. I can actually put a description of what I'm looking for and dig around. There's lots of ways to go about it, but to me, for me, at this point, I think the easiest thing to do most of the time is to just start typing in a few letters. Like if I type in mean, I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. I'm seeing some other weird mean things. So I might try, okay, well, I know the mean is also commonly referred to as an average. So here is the average function, and the description says that it returns the average, which is the arithmetic mean, just like it says right here, the arithmetic mean of its arguments, which can be numbers or names, arrays, or references. Okay, so that sounds good. I'm going to double click that, and then it's asking me for the numbers that I want to be in my average, and I can click them one by one and separate them by commas. But the quickest way, if all your data values are together close by without any gaps, you can just select all the cells as a range. And so that's, the fastest way to do it is just to select the whole range all at once like that. All right. Now the median, there is a function for the median. Okay, just it's the word median. And we do the same thing. We select all the values and press enter. The mode, no, not really. Well, yes, actually, it does have that, but it's usually easy to just look and see if there's a number that repeats, and which number repeats the most often. Like this number right here, 126.2, shows up 3 times in this data set. So my mode should be 126.2 because no other data value in this data set repeats 3 times or more. Then the mid-range is just going to be taking the smallest value, which is my minimum, and I'm just going to do this really quickly. I'm going to first, um, to help me with getting my mid-range, I'm going to need the minimum and the max. Okay, so I'm going to use equals min to get the smallest number in my data set, then max, which is the largest number in my data set, and then I'm going to actually average to find the middle point. So adding them and dividing by 2 gives you a midpoint. That's a midpoint is just the average of your 2 endpoints. So now I have my mid-range. So there are all my answers. And now I'm able to put those right in here. I can even copy and paste them right from Excel back over into the answer fields here. And then, of course, we always want to be looking out for any directions that suggest certain round-offs or other little tips. You will often find little notes next to your answer boxes or right underneath the answer boxes that will give you some insight as to what kind of answers will be accepted. And so you always want to look out for those kinds of tips and recommendations as far as how to enter your answers. Here it doesn't have any special recommendations, so I think it's going to be fine just like it is, and I'm going to press submit. And there I got all my green check marks. Yay. So I hope you learned something in this video, and I will see you in the next one.